Good afternoon and welcome to the pre-agenda interview for Wednesday, March 11th, 2026 for the Historic Review Commission, the Public Art Committee, and the Civic Design Committee. We're going to take the Historic Review Commission first. If the clerk will please read the title of the bills.
Bill 131, Resolution appointing Catherine Blauvelt as a member of the Historic Review Commission for a term to expire January 1st, 2029. Bill 132, Resolution appointing K. Chase Patterson as a member of the Historic Review Commission for a term to expire January 1, 2027. Bill 133, Resolution appointing Luna Frunsgaard as a member of the Historic Review Commission for a term to expire January 1, 2029. And Bill 134, Resolution appointing Martha Eisler as a member of the Historic Review Commission for a term to expire January 1, 2028. Bill 147, Resolution appointing Emily Stedge as a member of the Public Art Committee of the Public Art and Civic Design Commission for a term concurrent with that of the mayor. Bill 148, Resolution appointing James Hill as a member of the Civic Design Committee of the Public Art and Civic Design Commission for a term concurrent with that of the mayor. And Bill 150, Resolution appointing Kendall Solar as a member of the Civic Design Committee of the Public Art and Civic Design Commission for a term concurrent with that of the mayor.
Thank you. For the record, we are currently joined by Councilwoman Strasburger, although I expect other members will trickle in shortly. With that, what I would like to do is open it up to our nominees. If you would please introduce yourself, tell us who you are, tell us why you're willing or wanting to serve on this important commission, and then we'll turn it over to members for questions. And we're also joined by Councilman Warwick. So we'll start with Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Council President. My name is Chase Patterson, and I'm honored to be considered for appointment to the Pittsburgh Historic Review Commission. I am a lifelong Pittsburgher, having never lived anywhere else, and I'm proud of it. My understanding of neighborhoods and the importance of place began early in my life. I grew up in Beachview, where my mother still lives today, and my uncles and aunts lived when they were very young as well. And some of my earliest memories of community and place come from places like John's Drug Store, the neighborhood food land, St. Catherine's, and the Carnegie Library. Those places were more than buildings for me and more than storefronts. They were anchors for our daily life, places where my family gathered and the spirit of our community was felt. And so watching Beachview evolve over the years has taught me that neighborhoods change, but the physical spaces within them carry the memory of the people who built and sustained them. And so that's the lessons that I've learned in my career. And for nearly a decade serving as the CEO of the Urban Academy in Larmer, I first stepped into leadership there, and many of my advisors encouraged us to tear down our school building. And they advised me also to tear down what is now our outreach center. But what I understood then was something that I've learned, and that is that place and preservation and the future are all intertwined. And so I believe that the bones of buildings carry the stories of neighborhoods, and my experience has shaped my perspective deeply. And so I believe that historic buildings and historic places are not obstacles to progress, they're opportunities to connect the past to the future. And so when preserved thoughtfully, they provide cultural continuity, identity, and the dignity that communities need and deserve. So if confirmed, which I hope to be, I would approach this role with humility, thoughtful judgment, and deep respect for the neighborhoods whose stories are written all across the history of Pittsburgh. This is a city that has always reinvented itself, and the work of this commission helps to ensure that as we grow, we do not lose sight of where we've come from. So thank you all for your consideration. I look forward to your questions, and I would be honored to serve.
Thank you.
Thank you, members of the council. My name is Catherine Blauvelt, and I'm honored to be considered for appointment for the Historic Review Commission. I am a librarian with 10 years of professional experience in rare books, special collections, and research services. I currently serve as the Special Collections Coordinator at the Carnegie Mellon University's Posner Center. Before that, I spent 2 years managing the Rare Books and Special Collections Department. reestablishing public access to the collection and directing the conservation lab at the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh main branch. Prior to Pittsburgh, I spent 6 years at the New York Public Library's Stephen A. Schwarzman building, where I worked in both the General Research Division and the Art and Architecture Division. I hold a Master's of Library and Information Science with a certificate in Special Collections from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Throughout my career, I have been drawn to architectural history. At the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, the first display I curated for Local History Day was on Pittsburgh's architecture. I went on to curate an exhibit spotlighting Elise McCure, Pittsburgh's first female architect, whose only surviving building in the city, St. Paul Episcopal Church in the Hill District, is recognized as a historic landmark. I also championed the digitization of the Home Monthly, a Pittsburgh magazine from the 1890s, edited by Willa Cather, whose April 1898 issue profiles McCure and features her design for a children's hospital at the Marshalsea Poor Farm near Bridgeview, Pennsylvania. That building has since been demolished, but the complete run of the Home Monthly is now being digitally preserved and made publicly accessible, ensuring that the record of McCure's work lives on. I was also responsible for the care of the Old Stone Tavern ledger, a document from the 1790s that was instrumental in securing the building's historical landmark designation. At NYPL, I staffed the Art and Architecture Reference Desk, helping researchers locate records and historical documentation. And at CMU, I have access to the architecture archives, which hold the papers of architects like Benno Jansen and Henry Hornbostel. Preserving architectural history has been a thread running through my entire career. My connection to this work is also personal. I am passionate about architecture. Just last week in Miami, I skipped the beach to see a parking garage by Herzog and de Meuron. For my first wedding anniversary, I brought my husband to Mies van der Rohe's Farnsworth House in Plano, Illinois. When my family came to Pittsburgh, I found a city with one of the most architecturally diverse collections anywhere in the world, and that architecture isn't distant or museum-like. It is woven into the fabric of daily life. On Sundays, my children attend school at Hornbostel's Road of Shalom. During the week, they learn at Benno Jansen's Falk School. Just recently, we moved into a Benno Jansen house on Kinsman Road. I found an early image of our home from 1911 in Architectural Record, Volume 30, and I have plans to open up the enclosed porch and restore it to its original glory. I work at Carnegie Mellon University, where Hornbostel's campus surrounds me every day. H.H. Richardson's Romanesque Courthouse, Hornbostel's City County Building, Daniel Burnham's Union Station. These are not landmarks we visit. They are the streets we walk, the buildings we enter, the city we live in. I want to help keep it that way. I love this community. I'm raising fourth-generation Pittsburghers, and I want this city to remain the same extraordinary place for them and for generations to come. Through my professional work, I am already guarding Pittsburgh's history, its rare materials, and its cultural records. Serving on the commission would let me guard it in one more way, by helping to protect the buildings themselves. I would be proud to take on that responsibility. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Very much. Ms. Fransgaard?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Luna Fransgaard. Thank you all for your attention. I am a design principal with Indovina Associates Architects here in Pittsburgh. We do all kinds of work ranging from residential to institutional, commercial, really all scales and types of projects. Some of the very core work of our business is historic buildings and the refurbishment of historic buildings in Pittsburgh. We've worked on a number of buildings throughout the 10 years that I have been living here in Pittsburgh, including, I wrote a list because there's a lot of them, but including the terminal building on the south side, to which we refurbished the existing buildings into new commercial space and created a plaza, an outdoor public plaza with it. We have worked on the Garden Theater. We've worked on currently the Wellington and the Pennsylvania are two historic residential multifamily buildings that are just being finished. I've worked on Rockwell Park in Point Breeze for over 5 years, both on master planning, architecture, interiors, and how to insert new purpose into historic buildings. Some of the other ones we're working on have been Masonic Hall, Knights of Malta, the Brass Building, which houses our own office. In fact, there used to be an old brass manufacturing business in the Strip District, and we repurposed it for residential and commercial. And I think it's a very personal project, but a good example of how our office and my personal approach to historic conservation when it comes to architecture which is infuse the purposeful life of historic buildings for the future without compromising, of course, the architectural integrity and of the building and a community and the city as a whole. Currently, we're working on doing the same thing to the Gulf Tower close by here in downtown, which will be a mixed-use project. So really in my work with Indovina, I go through a lot of these processes from the design perspective, and I'm hoping to bring that experience to the commission and really help provide some insight to how we can best use and guide any applicants or any projects towards the best possible use of historic buildings. It's not just a museum. They shouldn't necessarily just be the way they were, but it's a matter of being respectful to the original architectural intent and also providing opportunities for new use. So I'm very excited for this hopeful opportunity, and I thank you very much for your attention. And likewise, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Marty Eisler. I'm a 43-year resident of Squirrel Hill, not a native of Pittsburgh, but I'm going to die here with my boots on, as I say to my friends, so I hope it's not anytime soon, but I certainly love this city. I'm currently the secretary of the Board of Trustees for the Community College of Allegheny County. We've been involved in bringing to life a number of historic buildings for the college and to repurpose for college use. And we have tried in every instance to maintain the integrity of the building, the woodwork, not trying to destroy anything that would be of historic significance. And I think to date we've done a really good job, the latest one being Chalfont Hall that we just opened recently. I also am a longtime supporter of city trees. I was chair of the Shade Tree Commission for 15 years. I was a founding member of Tree Pittsburgh, a founding board member. I'm involved in a number of city projects with my role as president and past president of the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition, where I've been actively trying to bring some order to Forbes and Murray in terms of having enough benches for bus stops and trees for shade and things that will help the neighborhood maintain its unique urban status. I've also recently been, and still am, vice president and fundraising chair for the Neal Log House. If you don't know where that is, it's in Shenley Park. It's a circa 1795 house that was falling down. It was rescued by us incorporating in 2021 as the Friends of the Neal Log House. We began fundraising in 2022 after knowing all of what we needed to do to actually restore the house to historic preservation standards. And over the course of a year and a half, we raised over $300,000. We did manage to restore it. We have a contractor from Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, who is an expert with log houses, and he was brought in to actually do the work. We also have restored and gone to great lengths to furnish the Neal Log House with some items that had been left over from the Junior League purchase in the 1970s, but many had to be destroyed because during the process of the house being closed for 30 years, lots of critters came in. You might have seen fox in there in the newspaper and squirrels, and we had a groundhog that took us 3 years to get him a home 17 miles from here. And We have been struggling to maintain the landscaping, and we have plans to build a Virginia fence, and then our plans are to turn it over to a permanent leasee, a nonprofit that can run it for future generations, and we look forward to doing that. I'm very honored to be considered for this appointment, and I hope that I will be able to answer any of your questions, and I thank you.
Very much. We'll now turn it over to members with questions. For the record, let the record reflect, we've also been joined by our additional colleague, Councilwoman Strasburger.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here and for, clearly you're all incredibly qualified for this role. I appreciate your willingness to serve. And I really just have one question, because I know this is something that the Commission grapples with, and that is, how do you think about historic relevance and the need for historic preservation when it's a decision that, is maybe, how do you grapple with the decision to preserve based on the significance of the architecture itself versus the events that occurred inside the building? We've seen varying types of nominations come through that, where we know that there might be a less significant case for the architecture itself, but there have been significant historical events taking place inside, and obviously cases that are, where the structure itself is historically relevant. Might not be popular architecture for all types, because preference, it's all subjective, it's all based on preference, but it's historically significant. How do you think about historical relevance and structure relevance? And I encourage you, this is for everybody to answer, or anyone who wants to answer, just to say, I encourage disagreement. If you do disagree with one another, that's okay with me. So whoever starts doesn't have to be the vanguard of the answer. Anyone is able to start.
I'll start. I believe in balanced perspective. I also believe in trusting the perspective and the opinion of the staff that would advise the commission based on the guidelines that are in place. And so speaking specifically to balanced perspective, if we're permitted by the guidelines to take into consideration what happened inside of the building, then I would absolutely do that. If the guidelines require us not to take that into consideration, then I would follow the guidelines and the recommendation of staff.
I agree with Chase, what he just said, and I would take that one step further. I did spend a lot of my career in the field of regulatory administration, and I think writing the requirements and the regulations and the code in language that can be understood and can be applied equitably and can be applied reasonably by the people who are on the commission is key to us moving forward with answering your question. But I also believe sometimes there are ways to honor what happened inside a building in ways that don't require the building itself to be considered as the final answer. I think the balance is what Chase started with, and I agree that that's the way to approach it.
As someone who's in the business of preserving histories and culture, I think that a place can absolutely be very important to the happenings that are there. I think really listening to the community too, and what they would want and how their relationship with that building, what it's like, of course, like what's safe and keeping up with the codes, et cetera. But I really see being part of this commission is this partnership too with the community and what listening to them and kind of coming forward too, being informed by them and vice versa, and how we can work together in a partnership. But I do feel like it has to be case by case too, but a place can absolutely inform a history.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why as an architectural practitioner, I think this is such an interesting group and commission to be part of, because to me, historic preservation is such a wide range of things, and it is exactly what you described. It can be a place, it can be a building, it can be an event that happened that we collectively decide has enough significance that it should be honored in the future use of the building. And when we think about historic buildings, maybe most people think of, log cabins or older buildings, but really we're also going into an era of saying, what is architectural significance or building significance that's worth preserving? It could be the Herzog and de Meuron parking garage, even though it's not really, it's a range, and I think they're so, I would love to contribute in a way to advise on what is the best use of it and how do we preserve architectural excellence and cultural excellence as well. So I don't know if it's really an answer per se, but I think I very much agree with you that it is a sliding scale, and it's a very big responsibility to make those decisions, both on behalf of the people that come to us and come to you and want to do something else with the building, and to guard the ones that made it in the first place. And I think that the best path forward is to always ensure that whatever is changed is an added value. It's never a deduction, and doing that with high quality design, construction, whatever it might be, programming is important in my opinion. But thank you for the...
Thank you for your thoughtful answers, and I'll let my colleagues ask whatever questions they have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Charlin?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your willingness to serve here. I will be relatively brief here, but I do want to talk about one of the I think a couple people have mentioned the balance of historic preservation, and something that we have experienced here at council and in our city is the weaponizing of the Historic Review Commission. Oh my. Wow.
Yeah, everyone's getting it.
Well, that was an experience I
Just-
never had.
Just for the viewing public, we all just received a tornado warning on our phone, so that's why.
Is that what it was?
Yes.
Oh,
Tornado
my
warning.
goodness, a tornado. That's
That was how tough this question was. Sorry. Talk about losing your train of thought there. So I wanted to ask about the Historic Review Commission being used as a last effort to kill a project that a community doesn't support. Oh, sure. Sorry. Is it? Okay. Using the Historic Review Commission as a last-ditch effort to kill a project that someone has opposition to, and we've seen the city really be held back by some of finding a reason that something is historic, finding whatever that might be, and then putting it through that process as a way to kill housing in our city, to move back economic development. And I want to hear from you about how you would balance actual historic preservation and your authority to is a really important authority to stop the city from moving forward in certain places.
I'll start again as someone who practices architecture in the city of Pittsburgh and regularly come to the Historic Review Commission with projects. It's for us. It's always a balance between the developer's wants and what the project programming is, which versus the historic character of the building. And there's always stakeholders in play. There's the community. Rules and regulations, of course. I think I I'm hoping to balance it in a fairly, but I would say development forward way, never at the compromise of quality. Again, to my previous answer, to me it's the most important thing, to honor an historic building by adding something purposeful, both in terms of programming and architecture. And to me that is, again, high quality materials always, well considered planning and design. But again, it's a case-by-case basis, and there can be, of course, significant cases where you're like, this has to stay because it is this significant and we can't change it in the way that you want to change it. But I'd like to think that there is a lot of very talented architects in Pittsburgh that are come with very considered approaches and gentle approaches to projects. So I'm very much hoping to see some of that and help discuss it with the commission.
I think what you said is important, but I also would emphasize that your topic of what's going to happen after the historic building is saved. Is there going to be programming? Is there going to be a group that's going to keep it operating? Is there going to be something that can be offered to the community that is going to be helpful in a way that provides economic development or tourism or whatever it is that we're trying to achieve? I think saving it for the sake of saving it without having a plan going forward is a little troublesome to me.
I mean, a great example could be, we have so many wonderful churches in Pittsburgh that, has such a rich cultural history, and unfortunately many of them are currently abandoned and in decay, being dilapidated, and it's a very typical dilemma that we encounter if someone wants to buy the church and make it residential, for example. We think that we can do that in a purposeful and honorable way to the building, but sometimes encounter just too many challenges to get through the processes to make that happen. And then 5 years later, the church is still sitting in decay, unused, and is becoming a blight to the city. Yeah, or 10, or 15, whatever it might be. I mean, that's just one example of, it would be great if there was better avenues to help move those things forward, because, as you say, the community many times will use that as kind of the beating stick to, there might be one or two neighbors on the block that don't want anything to happen, and then the rest of the neighborhood do not want to see it blighted and graffiti all over it. And
right.
So I think that's just a very real problem that hopefully this commission can help address in a more efficient and reasonable way.
I think you're exactly right. In 5 or 10 years, the boarding up and the graffiti and what happens with the parties of people trying to get into the building and maybe not use it for the purposes for which it was intended. There are buildings around that I think we all know and we have seen for years that are still there and just falling further down. And I think there should be a way for us to balance what you said and be respectful, but allow it to be maybe made into condominiums or some kind of housing. I absolutely understand what you're saying.
Oh, I was just going to say, I really am invested in the city of Pittsburgh. I'm raising my family here. I want to see it move forward in a thoughtful, productive way, and how we can be purposeful with the changes that are made. I don't want to see it boarded up. I don't want to see that happen. I want it to grow. So again, like working with whoever is coming forward on the project that they are interested in, and doing the research too behind that existing building, and then thoughtfully taking it to the next. I think it was in your opening statement where you were saying about looking to the future but moving or looking to the past but moving forward. That's yes.
I would say, Councilman, preservation and progress can coexist. They should, especially in a city like Pittsburgh. And there's more than enough evidence to suggest that it can be done successfully. If I can speak to what I believe to be the core of your question, and that is the weaponization of this commission for specific interests that may not be aligned with the purpose of this commission. I believe that vision conveys purpose. And we are ultimately will be responsible for ensuring that the vision that is presented to us, whether it be for preservation or for progress, for lack of a better term, we need to be sure that it is well intentioned for the community that it's in, and that it enriches the greater vision of the city. And I think while we are certainly political appointees, I'm not a politician. My purpose on this commission will be to exact the standards that we are held to by way of this confirmation. And so I personally will not allow myself to be weaponized against this body or any other for any political purposes outside of progress or preservation.
So, one of the things that's interesting in Pennsylvania is that you don't have to own a building for it to be deemed historic. That is not the case everywhere. I have a very good friend who's a preservation planner in Dallas, and you have to own the building if you want to make it historic. But I can just point at a building and say, let's evaluate that as historic, something I have no interest in. And we've seen that happen. We've seen that happen for a variety of different reasons. And that is something that we now at council, we make sure that on our agenda we see, does the owner of the building support this nomination or not? I will never support a nomination that the owner does not support. If you don't own the building and you don't think you have the capital in order to keep it up to historic guidelines, someone else shouldn't be pointing at your building and saying that, this is how you have to have it, and this is the kind of expense. What you're doing is you're saying you have to keep those kind of expenses on this building, and it's something that greatly frustrates me with the way that we do historic review. The other thing, one of the organizations that comes before you a lot, they came in my district and they wanted to nominate something as historic, and luckily the community group was like, don't do that, that doesn't fit with the neighborhood plan. And then they were like, what else can you make historic? And that's not how we should be doing historic review. Historic review should not be, I'm looking for something to keep myself interested. It should be that building actually, is the Cathedral of Learning. It's the tallest educational building, I think, in North America. That's something we want to keep historic. It shouldn't be, I'm looking for a project because I want to, keep funding for my organization, so I have to have so many nominations per year. I'm curious if you guys can talk about like how you'll manage, actually doing preservation with, just folks that don't own the building and don't understand the economics of what a historic building means.
I'll restate that I believe vision conveys intent. And so how a presentation is made and what that presentation entails will be significant in how I will work in collaboration with my colleagues and the staff to formally make a decision. I also am unprepared to answer the question specifically about an individual and or organizations identifying buildings that they would intend to preserve, because I'm not sure how slippery of a slope that is in terms of whether it would prevent the city from identifying a building that it wants to preserve as historic. And so I would lean on the council or the staff again to help inform that decision.
I think providing encouragement to owners for both development and upkeep of their historic structures is important. There's a lot of development in Pittsburgh that rely heavily on historic tax credit funding, for example, and RCAP money, et cetera, that would not be possible as new construction, for example. So having this sort of vast historic building mass in Pittsburgh is, in my opinion, can be a great advantage. And I think it just is the commission's job to see through that weaponization, because I completely understand what you mean. I've seen it firsthand multiple times, and it is a shame. But again, it's also it's an important balance that should be held by the city of Pittsburgh, and not necessarily only by the building owner or only by the community. It should be held by a third party committee, which is what this is. So I think that's why it's so important.
And so, I represent East Carson Street, which I would imagine is the longest historic district in the city. I don't know that to be true, but I would imagine it is. One of the situations that happened on the district, or in the district in the 90s, the historic designation of East Carson Street and the tax credits that were available from it actually were very important in order to revitalize the district when the district was really dilapidated in the 80s, and we were able to move it forward. Was the historic designation, going after the tax credits, being able to preserve the buildings along there. But it's a double-edged sword, because a couple years ago we had an old gas station that was turned into a barbecue restaurant, and it's not contributing. This is not, George Washington never went to this gas station. This is just an old gas station, and not contributing to the district, so it's not a contributing property. Someone wanted to turn it into a different restaurant that was going to have a volcano at it, and I got asked, well, if we do
Outside volcano?
on the outside in the historic district,
A
and the historic
volcano.
a volcano. They're not. I mean, they were going to build a volcano. And so the project was killed in historic review, and ultimately that building sits vacant today, and it's been vacant for 5, 6, 7 years. Nothing has gone in there. Someone had a plan to make that happen, but when we killed the volcano, we killed the project, and it sits empty. And that's, the kind of things that can happen from the Historic Review Commission. And I need to move the district forward. So I see it, I do see it as a double-edged sword. A lot of that tax credit money has dried up and does not exist in the way that it does before. So I think the last thing, and this isn't a question, and I know I've been long here, but I also see one of the roles I would like to see from you is advocating for more tax credit money for historically designated properties to make this possible. If this is actually something we want to do, it's not going to come locally, but we need that money to come in and make it viable. I've got a Chinese restaurant that might go out of business because they don't want to repair their windows in the way that's historically accurate, and they just can't afford it. So, that money needs to, I hope that you can see yourselves as advocates to the state to try to get that money to come back to us.
The East Carson Street is a great example of something that's not, it's a district, it's a part of Pittsburgh's history that is not just a freestanding building. Mm-hmm. And I think that whether it's the volcano or not, but kind of chipping away piece by piece and saying, oh, this particular building in this district is not historically significant, but might be okay to do that 1, 2, or 3 times, but the more times you allow it and the more times you set precedents, whether the volcano was warranted or not, but the more you chip away, you're not necessarily doing the district as a whole justice, and you might be doing a disservice because people see East Carson Street as a historic, it's very historic significant part of Pittsburgh. I know it's
the longest Victorian Main Street.
Yeah, and if suddenly, I've seen in many other cities where the right procedures have not been in place, and then suddenly there's a new Walgreens, and then this thing pops up, and it might not seem like much on a single standing project basis, but then suddenly 10 years later, the area has lost its character. So being guardians of looking ahead, and it is a very challenging thing to have an opinion about, because how am I to say that my opinion is better than yours, or it's a very personalized opinion, I guess, to have about historic character. But being able to see the bigger picture of Pittsburgh as a whole and seeing 10, 20, 50 years ahead, I think would be the goal, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I understand like the chipping away. You know, if we build a volcano, we chip away at the historic desert. We also chip away at the historic value of the district when the building sits vacant.
Don't get me wrong, I'm an architect. I like to get things built and get things through. So I'm certainly development forward. But again, it's a matter of looking at what fits right, and the right projects will fit in that context, and they should be supported, of course.
Yeah, they should be supported. If the Chinese restaurant, if the only reason why they're leaving is because of that building, let's find ways to, either through tax credits, et cetera, to help them succeed. They're a member of that community now, and help them, you know, preserve the building in a right, thoughtful way and exist there and not, you know.
I'm wondering about that as well. Some of the facade money, some of
Yeah.
the other ways that you can improve your building, would they be eligible for that? I think exploring other ways to keep the Chinese restaurant open in spite of them needing new windows that they can't afford at this time.
Yeah, but you know, at the same time, the facade grants, the money doesn't go very far. So, you know, that's a limited budget there, and we've got other storefronts that also need that money
Right.
to stay open businesses and make our other main streets thrive. And we're putting this requirement on a business that is now going to be happy to take their business out to Cranberry or wherever, you know. And then I've got another storefront I've got to fix. So, all right. I think I've gone a lot longer than I intended to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Warwick?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everyone for being here and for putting your hat in the ring for the commission. So yeah, I have some, I mean, it's all sort of along the same lines. The first thing is like, so with historic designation and, you know, any building that's named you know, the sort of, and maybe this is sort of to the councilman's point, that really scares people off. Like I have a building in Hazelwood. It's the old Hazelwood Library. It's a beautiful old building, and there have been 3, maybe 4 different folks who have come through with ideas for projects. I mean, luckily we just got a grant to fix the roof so that we don't lose the building entirely, right? But you know, I have someone who's interested in the building now for you know, this is just very early stages. But when I talked to them, this idea of it was like, oh, is the building designated historic? Like, oh, and it was like, yeah, it is. And it was just like, oh, I mean, it was just like grown, like and so this notion that, again, this building could just disappear because we make it too hard for someone to you know, come in and just kind of do what they want to do with the building. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that and what the role that the commission might play in those conversations.
That's the balance that we talked about earlier. You don't want it to stay vacant. You don't want
it's awful. I mean, it's just like
terrible
garbage
for a
and
building.
graffiti. It's
Or any structure to be vacant
Yeah.
for 5 or 10 or whatever. It just falls apart. So you don't want that. But you have to be able to negotiate that balance of what's the building going to be used for? Is the outside integrity of the building, at least the way it appears if it's a historic district, is it going to be maintained? There are all kinds of questions that I would ask going forward, and I understand, I've heard the groan of people that I know that are in historic buildings, but I'm inclined to preserve that integrity of the street or of the building or whatever it is, but I'm not inclined to do it instead of allowing it to move forward in a different kind of mix of uses that would, as I said, preserve what it looks like to the historic district, but would keep it from from falling down. I think that balance is something that we all would have to struggle with.
I assume it also ties to the guidelines that we're adhering to and reviewing those in ensuring enough flexibility in order to be able to respectfully address a number of different types and styles of project, that the guidelines are not too rigid and they allow for that reuse for a modern purpose, but without letting someone just do exactly whatever they want with it, which could be, painted purple or clad it in corrugated metal.
Right.
So it is that balance, but ensuring the flexibility in the commission's guidelines and the workings that we're bound by, I think is very important.
I think the issue is more, I see what you mean, but, the interest in the building is to preserve, right, is sort of an opportunity to preserve, to do something good for the community. But I think the concern is more about material, right, yeah, like materials,
Yeah.
like, this kind of roof versus the roof that's going to cost, whatever, 4 times as much because it's like the historic this or that.
The appropriate.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So, anyway, well, that's good to know. Just that I feel like that flexibility definitely needs to be there, right? And because, like with Neil, and also maybe the history of why the building is, because this, much like the Neil Log House, is a building that the city of Pittsburgh just let rot, right, for a very long time. And that's why it is the way that it is, right? Like, we should have cared for that building long ago, and we didn't, for whatever reason. Yeah, sort of. And this conversation about historic districts, it's funny because we had a meeting of RCOs from around the city. There was some talk of changing, the RCO guidelines and whatnot. And and I don't have a historic district in my district, but there was one person on the call from, I think it was like the Mexican War Streets, and they were saying, oh yeah, all these reviews, it's such like you want to do one little thing, right? You want to do one little thing to your house and it's just like a whole rigmarole. Yeah. But then there was also somebody from from talking about East Carson Street that was like, oh, but we're losing the character of the neighborhood. And so in this conversation, and it's like with and I always see this, and it's funny that you're from Indivina because your firm does such a good job of making things beautiful and making them fit, right, in any number of projects. I always actually mention your firm when I'm talking about what is good, right, like what can be in new development, but is like this risk of becoming like mixed city, which we see everywhere, all around the country. Just like mixed city, everything looks the same. It's like this, I feel like you see it a little bit in the Strip District, right? It's starting to happen, and it's just like everything looks the same. And I don't know, and I know that it's not, this commission is only if the building or whatever is historic, but I just am wondering if you have any thoughts, because of course that's the planning commission thing too, right? Like for new build. So if you have any thoughts just about that. I know even if it doesn't pertain directly to your commission.
Are you talking about like the architectural diversity of the city?
Yeah.
That's why I'm drawn here. I don't want that to go away. That's why I'm here. I want there to be the Mexican War Streets where I feel like I'm just, like I'm in Squirrel Hill and I'm going there. I'm just experiencing it in such a different way, the city, and I love that. It is so diverse, but at the same time, what you're saying of having the difficulties of, for instance, the library, I don't want that. I don't want the process to be so difficult that people like shy away for it, and they don't. I want them to take ownership and feel a sense of pride, and I have this historical building, and you know, that this is part of the story of the city, and in these ways, in these different ways. I would hope that I would contribute to making this easier. I think it's amazing that people coming forth too in front of the commission are like, they want to invest, they want to bring up their buildings, or you know, better them for the community too. And then they have these amazing ideas, right? If they have an idea and they're coming and they're like, oh, I want to create, I want to go forward. I would hope that I could be of some use to assist them. And you know, I feel like it's a balance, but I'm rooting for them. I want them to succeed. I want the city to succeed. So.
I agree, and I too love the Mexican War streets,
Yeah.
and I love the house tours over there. I love when they do the festivals over there. And I've heard stories about a window that had to be replaced with a wood window instead of a window that might last for 40 years, or the wood, because of the moisture and whatever coming from the roof, would destroy it in 10. And I think to myself, if a man on a galloping horse didn't notice that that window was made out of vinyl instead of wood, would I consider that to be egregious and not allowed? No, I wouldn't. If I could look at it and think, well, it looks exactly like it did historically, but yet it's more cost effective, it's going to last longer, it'll keep the building from falling down. I think that's part of the balance that becomes some common sense that you have to interject into whatever the conversation is.
I think, Councilwoman, the tension that you're describing is real. It requires thoughtful decision-making on our part, and it requires us to not only be thoughtful about the importance that preservation has for the character of communities, but also what that potential preservation may be sacrificing for the future of that community. And ultimately, what will be important in those deliberations for me is where the community stands, where you stand as its elected representative, and then frankly, leaning over to staff and asking, what the hell can we do? Are we allowed to do this? And then, you know, if it's controversial, so be it. You know, history tells those stories too. And so I think it's important to know from the gate that we should be leaning on the council that we have as staff to make sure that whether the tough decision we're about to make is an okay decision to make, and if so, we stand tall on it and we wait for the next vote.
And I also think that since the requirements, the regulations haven't been rewritten since 1979, basically, that there's probably a lot that we can do with rewriting that and the process for application and things that really need to be updated. I think we can all agree that that's something that 1979 isn't exactly where we should be in terms of writing requirements for a historic review commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I understood your question correctly, I think, you know, that the real estate development in Pittsburgh, as anywhere else, is economically driven. That's just reality of it. And whether it's a historic building or it's a new building, you know, your question about why does it all look the same? Because developers want to maximize as much as they can within the parameters that are given in the zoning and in the planning guidelines, and that's completely understandable. Our job is to make sure that the projects that are being brought forward, and that's more of a city planning question, of course, for the new buildings, that they are interesting, they do benefit, you know, the pedestrian experience, they have architectural character, and I think finding ways to incentivize developers to take more care and spend more money, frankly, on architecture, and the goal is to have buildings that are historic buildings that are beloved and preserved 100 years from now, just like the ones that we're trying to preserve through the commission. And I think to me, that is sometimes the danger of this sort of the newer development, is that it's very fast and it's, so trying to take care as much as you can and give developers opportunities, because regulations and restrictions do not foster development. So that's outside of the realm of this particular group, but I think that's what you were getting at, that it's not, it's all tied together as a web of economy and development for Pittsburgh as a whole, and the historic preservation is just one piece of that much larger puzzle.
It is tied to historic review because it's the character of our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Some of our neighborhood is historic, some of it is ugly as sin, and it was allowed to be built, in my humble opinion, never should have been. But that's, again, the balance. I think all of these commissions need to work together to make it possible to develop these sites that we have, but also to consider what it does to the uniqueness of our neighborhoods. The South Side is different from Squirrel Hill. It's different from the Mexican War Streets. It's different from the Hill District. That we need to recognize that and help these developers not just put white and black buildings for blocks and blocks so that it has no character, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, it's, I lived in Germany for a long time, and in towns that were destroyed in World War II. Are you German?
I'm Danish.
You're Danish. Never mind. Okay, but
I know,
I may be wrong about, but like,
you're talking about.
But
yeah.
it's like at the times the towns made a decision. After the war, like, are we gonna go modern or are we gonna go make it look exactly how it used to? And it's very strange. I mean, it's kind of odd. Like, you can go to Freiburg and it's like, oh, this is so old, but actually it's not. It's a good replica, or like Stuttgart, which is all modern. So we have to do it more gradually than that. Which is good. But the last thing I wanted to ask about is parks. So we have some, like, recently historic designation, I think, of Frick Park, historic designation of Shenley Park. And, I came into office fighting a project of, of like a road project going through a park, this idea that we protect our parks. And but at the same time, there are projects, there's the golf course project, which is looking to modernize, just your thoughts on kind of the balance between preserving these very old parks that really are like an incredible asset for the city. I mean, it's to me, it's the most valuable thing that Pittsburgh has, are these incredible parks, like right in the heart of the city. From your viewpoint, from the commission, how do we preserve that, but then also allow the parks to evolve for the needs of park users?
I was very involved in the golf course, the golf club building that was, in some neighbors' opinions, should have been preserved and restored. And actually, it was 3 buildings built in 3 separate sections with no HVAC that worked together, and flooring that was falling apart, and it was literally, in part, a falling down building. And preserving it, it had no historic relevance that anybody could find, but the idea of tearing it down, just some neighbors didn't want to see it happen. But now we have this really nice-looking Arnold Palmer Center and First Tee golf club house that I think is a statement of what can be done if you do it correctly and if you work with the architects and the developers, etc. But the golf course itself, it's been there since 1896, but it has evolved. The tees have changed, the greens have changed, the scope of the hills and the sand traps and the trees, and it's changed over 1896, and it's changed to meet the needs of the people who use it. And I think that has to be considered in this mix of changing anything that happens in our parks. That our people want to enjoy the parks. They'd rather have 9 holes than 18 holes. It doesn't have to be 18 holes. Some people would like to see a driving range. I'm not a golfer, so I have to consider what the people who use the facility want. So I think that in the case of the parks, it's the users of the parks, I think, who have to have a tremendous say in what happens going forward.
Go ahead.
No, I second largely what you were saying. I think preserving the land mass as these breathing spaces that are, belongs to all of us essentially in Pittsburgh, I think is the most important part. And as you say, it's probably looked very different in 1890 or, whenever it was done. But that's not to say that you should just, that it should just be a carte blanche to plop down whatever structure or event, or because it could also turn into an amusement park or a circuit. It can, and the I think what so many Pittsburghers enjoy about Frick Park and Shenley Park is that there are these vast areas that are kind of wild, and you have the feeling that when you walk through, you know. People walked the same path 100 years ago, and it probably largely looked the same, and that's okay. But so it is, again, the balance of being able to interject either temporary and gracious, installations, or something that's meant to be, maybe it's a way of, if someone wants to make an activity or a building, well, build something that can be disassembled and moved somewhere else in 20 years from now, as an example. It's not. But just kind of that approach of non-permanence in these park spaces, I think, could be an interesting way to look at development.
I would ask myself, particularly in this instance, what's in the best long-term interest of the community? And there are some communities that do not have access to the types of resources or forward thinking that other communities do. And it would be incumbent upon me to ensure that the voices that we're hearing, to discern whether they are the loud minority or whether we're not hearing from the silent majority. And that, I imagine, for you all specifically, is a very challenging perspective to have. But it's one that we will also have to accept as a responsibility to determine whether or not, again, the vision that we are hearing that is presented to us conveys the true intent of the thing that we're hearing. And so, I would want to make sure that we're equitable, but that, we're fair and just, and that the future of the community is at the forefront of the decisions that I will be making, and that I hope we will make as colleagues.
I just wanted to add that I think the parks are spectacular here. They're one of my favorite parts of the city, and I would be very much inclined to preserve them in any way possible. This idea of building something and moving it, I would be on board with that, like a movable structure or something. But they really enhance the community. I think everybody should have access to a green space in close proximity to where they live, if possible. I'm for the parks.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel very strongly too that they're public, right? Like
Yes.
they're not like, the parks can be very juicy because they sit between communities, right? And they could be a very enticing idea to use a park to connect to community, but that's, yeah. Well, this is very encouraging, and I think one thing, in the Planning Commission hearing, this actually came up, this idea, this community engagement question, right? Like, what, when are we dealing with just kind of, neighborhood busybodies, I think was the word, versus like large scale, and it was this conversation like public engagement, it's hard for people to come out, and it is, right? Like these types of meetings, most people aren't able to come. But when people do, I hope that, as commissioners, when they're, for whatever reason, whether it's an emotional attachment, whatever the reason may be, when you have, 50, 60 people show up to advocate for something, and it sort of takes you by surprise, you know, like, whoa, this is not just like your typical one or two neighbors kind of, you know, putting up a fight because they don't want noise, you know, they just want things to stay the way they are. I don't know if you have experienced those types of situations in projects that you've been involved with. Maybe you have. You look, Chase, like you maybe have. So.
Again, I go back to vision conveys intent. You know, the 50 or so could be a well-organized, loud minority, and the question is, who has tapped into the other perspective to determine whether or not it is in fact in the best interest of the community. And when I refer to like being able to discern, that is up to us to do. So sometimes we will make, I assume, a decision that those 50 folks don't want us to make, but we will have to make it in the best interest of the community, consistent with the guidelines, as if it were any other decision to ensure equitability and the integrity of the work that we do as a commission.
That's, of course, what's so nice about the plans. If you happen to have a neighborhood plan, or we're working on a comp plan, is it gives you that, you know, you can say, look, we already talked about this as a collective. I know for me, I think of and luckily I didn't have to make a decision. I just got to watch, but was the Irish Center. I mean, that took me by surprise, you know, like just the sheer volume of people that came out in opposition to that project. And I was definitely glad that I did not have to make the call. It was the ZBA that made the call on that one. But anyway, well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. In the course of answering their questions, you really answered the questions that I had. So I will simply thank you all for your willingness to serve. And I think what you've discovered is there's always a sort of a healthy tension between historic preservation as well as potential progress moving forward. And I think all of us have had to deal with it over the years, especially Councilman Charlotte's point about nominating something but not being the owner of it. We actually had our former colleague was actually looking at legislation that would say if you were to nominate my home to be historic, you would have to do so with the funds to ensure that it was able to be maintained historic. And so that's always been a healthy tension. I think the hardest historic vote that I've had to deal with since I was here was the Civic Arena, which from an architectural standpoint was absolutely historic, but it was also historic for a lot of negative reasons as well. And so there was a tension there that had to be grappled with. So I share all that just to say I don't necessarily envy the position you're in, but I thank you for your willingness to serve, and I thank you for your willingness to make hard decisions. But I believe, having listened to you all, you have truly the best interests of our community at heart, and so I thank you. With that, we'll let you go, and we'll ask for Emily.
Thank you.
Emily Stedge, James Hill, and Kendall Solar to please come forward. All right, Mr. Hill, good to see you again.
Afternoon, hi.
We'll start with you. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're willing to serve, and then we'll go down the line, and then we'll turn it over to members.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is James Hill. Lifelong Pittsburgher. Grew up in a bit of Highland Park in the Hill District. I've worked here at the city for a bunch of years, at the Cultural Trust for a bunch of years. I always like to say proud graduate of our Pittsburgh Public Schools, and that's really where my my love of the concept of civic architecture began. You know, Council President and dear old Shenley High. They don't build buildings like that anymore, but I really think the height of kind of civic architecture is that it is meant to inspire. You know, buildings like this, buildings like some of our fire stations in our neighborhoods, the idea of, you know, steeples from firehouses and police stations kind of have often formed the fabric of neighborhoods. And I think the city can be a very good, not necessarily preserver, but, you know, capture of the intent of the idea that public service can still be a noble and important aspect. And I think that our buildings in our public realm can reflect that without necessarily costing a lot of money. We're like kind of that last standard bearer, I think, of the idea of noble service. And everything we build, from our buildings to our parks to things like that, I think can reflect that. Personally, I think a lot of you guys know I am deeply interested in keeping these buildings in good condition and showing that the city can always put its best face forward, because for a lot of our citizens, you know, they never make it down here. What they will see is their fire station, their police station, their park project. That's their version of the city, you know, in their neighborhood. So what can we do on this particular commission, what I hope to do to help us put our best face forward?
Good afternoon. My name is Kendall Solaire, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm a proud resident of the Pittsburgh Greenfield neighborhood, where I live with my husband, Scott. Nearly a decade ago, I moved to Pittsburgh sight unseen. I quickly fell in love with the people, culture, and places that make this city special, and over time, I've developed a deep appreciation for Pittsburgh's layered landscape, its rivers, bridges, and neighborhoods, and how the built environment helps shape the city's identity. As both a student of urban planning and a practitioner of design, I've long been interested in the role that public architecture plays in civic life. I believe the spaces and structures that belong in the public should be accessible to everyone and designed with care and beauty so they can serve as a lasting source of pride for the city as a whole. Professionally, I serve as the interior design director at Shelton Design Associates here in Pittsburgh, where my work focuses on residential renovations in primarily historically significant homes and also boutique hospitality projects. My role frequently involves balancing preservation with thoughtful design that allows us to function better for how we live today. I earned my Master of Interior Architecture from Chatham University here in Pittsburgh, and my undergraduate studies were at Texas A&M University, focused on urban and regional sciences, where much of my work explored how underutilized, abandoned industrial spaces can be thoughtfully redeveloped into meaningful community spaces. I'm grateful to Mayor O'Connor for the nomination and his administration, and would be honored to contribute my perspective and experience to the work of the Pittsburgh Civic Design Commission as the city continues to evolve. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I look forward to questions.
I'm Emily Stedge. I have lived in Pittsburgh for 13 years, not my whole life, but it is the longest I've ever lived in one place. And part of why I stayed is because I am a creative person, and I was looking for a city after I graduated college where I could thrive as a creative person. And so my creative background is in writing, but I've had the privilege of working at Pittsburgh Center for Arts and Media for almost 9 years now. I'm their Director of Education and Communication, so I work with a group of 40 to 50 artists to develop and run our robust schedule of community arts classes, workshops, and summer camps for youth in the summer. And through this work, I've really had the unique experience of not only creating opportunities for artists themselves to get paid for their work, but also to see firsthand how they can have an impact on the community. I would say a lot of our students who come to take classes with us are people who would self-describe as non-artists, even though they are very regularly making art. And I think these opportunities for the community and the general public to engage with the arts and artists who are living and working in the city has the power to really break down some boundaries and, you know, make it a little bit easier to access art beyond just, we have wonderful museums, but I think when people are able to access art in their day-to-day lives, whether it be a hands-on experience or public art that they're seeing, on their daily commute or at their public park, it can be really powerful. Art tells a story of people, the places that they live in. And so I would be really honored to serve on this commission and the Public Arts Committee within it, to be able to expand my work within public art.
Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to members. Councilwoman Strasburger.
Thank you. So, Emily, I've had the privilege of working with artists when we had funding, we don't anymore, to disseminate to artists as part of the ARPA COVID relief funding. And I thought it was a really great learning experience as to how to apply when we do have the opportunity to apply funding for public art, for other spending that would probably be a little bit different from the public art committee. It was a great learning experience as to how that can be that process can be made more transparent, more accessible, and I know that's what we hear, right? Like artists, we're not doing a favor to artists when we say come and do business with the city. They are important. They drive economic, they're economic drivers for the city, and there's just like such a wealth of experience that we can gain from artists. So I guess with that, do you have thoughts about whether it's within the formal kind of membership of the Public Art Committee or as someone who can be an advocate for changes within the policies within at the staff level, how we can make the city more accessible to those who wish to do business with the city and really demonstrate the wealth of talent that we have in public spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my experience working with artists, I find that they often have the ability to do like a project, and it's great, and whether it's public art or it's an exhibition. And I think where we lack is our public, I think, still needs more arts education about why is it important to support artists, and why should we purchase art and support artists who are living and working in our city. I think there's a lot of funding that is no longer going to be available for these bigger projects, and I think one way to kind of combat that is to connect our communities with artists and teach them about this is what goes into creating this work of art, and why it's important to be maybe choosing local art versus something from Target or whatever it may be. And I think on this commission, I hope to have the opportunity to promote projects that kind of have that educational aspect within them.
Terrific, thank you. And I guess for everybody, why are you most interested? Some of you have addressed it a bit, but why are you most interested in serving? What do you hope to accomplish by serving? And I know you've been nominated. You didn't, you might have raised your hands, but what's the driver behind this for you, for each of you?
Me, okay.
I was actually pointing at the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can go first. So for me, I have experienced a lot of joy in the impact that I have at Pittsburgh Center for Arts and Media, and I feel really connected to the work as an advocate for the arts and artists in our communities, and I think this opportunity would allow me to expand that work beyond just the organization that I've worked for, and that's really exciting to me.
My biggest driver is just the love that I have for the city as a whole. As I mentioned, I moved here almost a decade ago and just fell in love with the opportunity that Pittsburgh has in every corner, in every alley, in every building possible. And so to be able to put my hat in the ring of being able to see the creative work that other people can present to us and have some kind of say in it, I think is an exciting thing to be able to contribute to the city, because I contribute in the way that I can through my own work, and to expand that is an exciting opportunity, I think, overall.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain why you love something. You know, I love public buildings. I love architecture. I love the role these spaces play in the public lives. For the same reason, I feel compelled that you occasionally will find me in the lobby with a broom and dustpan if I can help improve what we've built here and what we build every day in the public space and these grand public spaces and not so grand in various scales. I just want to do it. You know, it's hard to describe why you love something, but you just do.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you all so much for your willingness to serve on these committees.
Thank you, Councilman Charlie.
Yes, thank you again for your ability to serve here and your interest in the city and what we look like and how we grow here. The first question I want to ask, kind of for all of you, we are, kind of stuck in a tension here in the city where we need serious upgrades to pretty much all of our facilities. The Oliver Bathhouse doesn't need it, but so many things. Every time we meet with the firefighters, every time we meet with the police officers, everything needs these significant upgrades. But we're also very much strapped for cash. And I'm curious, kind of from your perspective, if we design things to the best design possible, we will build less. And I want to hear kind of where your thoughts are in that balance between getting those firefighters the upgrades that they so desperately need, and the medic stations, those upgrades, because they literally live out of their work office, and these are often in pretty deplorable conditions, versus making sure that they look the best that they can.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think those things are, mutually exclusive. I think particularly with our fire stations and stuff, a lot of that work is generally going to kind of almost be out of the scope of this commission. If we're talking, plumbing upgrades, heating things in the buildings themselves, that's not really areas I think that we would be having much say on. That's, of course, up to the Department of Public Works to tackle as they see fit. If we're talking building replacements and things like that, or, major upgrades to the exteriors of a lot of these fire stations, for example, I think that's where we come into play. It is a balance, but I don't think that it's something that can't be done. I think best is also, subjective. What is considered best can vary by area, neighborhood, city, country. I think we're pretty capable, and we've seen that, I think, so far with fire stations that have been replaced. I'm thinking of on Lafayette Street up there with that new EMS station that there was an old one there. They were able to take it down, take the component parts of it, save the beautiful parts, incorporate it into the new design, so you're still recalling the old place and fully rebuilt that EMS station. So I think it's easier than it may seem for us to balance that, because again, we're not the historic preservation side of it anymore. You know what I mean? It's just that what is a good public building, and how can we incorporate the best of old and new into that?
As a design professional, I'm pretty familiar with being given a budget. And one of the best practices that we do at my firm is dreaming really, really big at the beginning of a project and trying to make it astronomically more expensive than what it should be, and then value engineering it back. Because when you dream as big as you can, you end up coming up with some really amazing ideas that can benefit a lot of people in the process. And when you get those ideas, you realize what the priority is for a project, and then value engineering that budget back to be able to fit that initial budget. So I think that's the challenge of some of these projects, is figuring out what the priorities are and dreaming big, and then figuring out how to value engineer that project back to a budget that the city feels comfortable with. And it will never not be a challenge. But there are ways to do it, and ways to be creative with materials and phasing, and just so many creative ways that you can go about finding the right way to do it. And luckily, it's not our job to find the right way to do it. It's our job to help guide and assess the projects that are put in front of us. So
Yeah, I would agree that that balance is important. I don't come from the design side of things, but I do come from a creative thinking sort of background. And I think anytime that there is, a tricky problem to solve regarding, budget, money, dreaming big, you have to get creative with it. And I would be willing to kind of, think about how we can best do things while also maximizing where our dollar goes.
I only have one further question, and kind of any of you can answer this. I just want to know what is the best thing about being married to Scott?
It's an inappropriate question to ask.
You don't have to answer that. Thank you.
I don't think I'm going to, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The fourth floor candle.
Councilwoman Warwick?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to everyone for being here and for agreeing to serve. So I guess I'll one thing that I feel like we haven't done a great job with some of our new like in the newer areas of the city, right, is and I think it's probably just because it wasn't sort of on the radar as much as it is now, right, maybe a decade later, is public access to public. So, you'll have, and I think of like around East Liberty and areas like that, like you'll have these public squares kind of, but if you are walking, it's very hard to get, it's like you just have these like walls of building, you know what I mean? Like it's like the giant Target, it's just like a wall and you can't, it's fine if you're driving, right? But it's hard, even just crossing the street. Like, so if you just have any thoughts about that, and I know, James, we talked a bit at the table about, there was like a street vacation for the Trust Arts thing, and it was like, and it's concerning, right? About the public being able to access on foot, and when we build things, if the city owns it, it's one thing, we have a little more control, but, so if you have thoughts on that and how this commission might be able to help, improve the walkability of our especially our new built environments and public spaces.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend a lot on the project. Forgive me, I'm struggling to kind of think of exactly where the civic design is going to confront a lot of that stuff directly. I guess I assume, let's say we're building a new park, perhaps, somewhere one of these developments is going on. I think you just have to really approach it. It's going to sound a little silly too, like the old-fashioned way, as green and as open as possible to make people feel inviting from the moment that they get there. And then I think an area that we can be perhaps a little more directional in is ensuring when let's say the Department of Public Works does come to us with, a new park in this space, is maybe that's an area where we can question them a little bit more about, have they properly worked with DOMI, city plan, et cetera, and so forth, before they bring it to the design. Because I think where a lot of that area does mix is that we often find that the architects just build a building, they design a thing, and then they're just in front of civic design. And to your point about access, walkability, those sorts of areas that don't necessarily cross the lines, they might not talk to those areas as much. So maybe that's an area where we are questioning them about these things that makes them go, oh, you're right, we did need to talk to mobility and infrastructure about crosswalk improvements that were out of the scope. But I think that's where we can, as people who are experiencing this stuff a little bit outside of it, have a holistic look and kind. I think that's really the job, is to push them to think of other things, other issues, how it will be experienced by the public that they might not necessarily think of, because it's my job to design an EMS station, and their minds kind of stop there. It's my job to design this plaza and not necessarily the things around it.
I think it's also important to, to piggyback off of what James said, asking questions is like our number one goal, or my number one goal, if I were to sit on this commission, because there are a lot of reasons why architects and designers make decisions that they do, and they present it as if they've talked to us about all of these reasons why, and we don't really know until we ask the questions. And something that might seem different than before might actually be a more accessible pathway or a more accessible way of getting from one place to another if we were to just ask more questions and understand what their perspective is as designers and architects and planners and everything. So yeah, I think my perspective on it is to ask as many questions as possible and always keep accessibility in account for sure, because those are the people that need advocacy to make sure that our public spaces are for absolutely everyone. So.
Yeah, I second what my colleagues have said, and I think in terms of asking questions, I think for me, in asking questions of folks who propose different projects, I would be looking for sort of those bridges between what an architect might want and then also how can the public engage with the space. And that's accessibility, but that's also, how does it look? How do you experience it as, a pedestrian, as somebody, going for a walk through your community, and kind of gathering that information to understand what kind of impact that space will have on its community.
It occurred to me too when you were saying that too, and I think helping to push them that a lot of this stuff isn't expensive. Thinking a little bit more about signage and the percent for art and how you can really, what was something in the neighborhood that was around here. Those things don't add anything to the project budget really. But I think sometimes they get so stuck in the nuts and bolts of completion that all those little details that do create more welcoming public spaces, lantern, you know what I mean? There's all sorts of little things I think that really make these areas special. I'm thinking, you mentioned the Targets, I'm thinking of that plaza now on South Highland, right across from Broad Street there. It's a public plaza, but you're right, you kind of wouldn't know. There's not much that indicates there that it's a comfortable, inviting space. So what are smaller things like art and signage and historical stuff and, old community bulletin boards. And I think, again, you can go back to all these old pictures, and it's the way we used to design Chunley Park and Frick Park, and every park had a welcome center and a community billboard, and you put up your stuff and little things like that don't cost much of anything or add much to project budgets that make them a little more enjoyable.
And going off of that, with art and signage, I think there are really creative ways to incorporate art into things that are essential, like signage in a space. So, if a budget is tight, it doesn't necessarily have to be that we are, paying an artist for a big mural. It can be we are incorporating an artist into, the essential design of a space and creating, parts of that space that are now not just for function, but are also really pleasant and wonderful to look at.
Yeah, so that's good. That kind of leads me to my next question, which, you mentioned percent for art. So, somewhat recently that has been changed from being a percent of the project itself, for art on that project. It's just sort of ramming the art into the individual project to a neighbor, sort of citywide, where neighborhood by neighborhood. And I know, much to the chagrin of our city planners, I recently, asked council to vote in the negative on an artist who was chosen because and again, it was it was just an executive decision, right? I was just I don't, the community, I know the community needs this mural, right? I know that we need that, and this artist that, just doesn't do that, and I don't want that money. It was just, so my question is, and I think that with art, more than anything else, when it comes to art in a community, it is an opportunity for community engagement, right? It's not urgent, right? It's not urgent that we get this art in right away or whatever, right? So there really is so my question is kind of twofold. One is for you, looking at a project, what would count as meaningful community engagement for you, especially in an underserved community, right? In some communities, you're always going to get engagement. That's fine. You know what I mean? You can sort of count on the folks who are interested will come out and engage. But in other communities, you may not, right? You may have one or two people, and that really isn't representing. So what would sort of count for you as meaningful community engagement? And then also, where's the balance between like purpose and community function versus like, artistic license? Because we also don't want to ram it down the artist's throat, right? Like that's something, you have some artistic freedom as well, so.
Yeah, I think for me, meaningful engagement in an ideal situation would be, community members are able to participate in the project itself, whether it is helping with the design or helping with the implementation. At Pittsburgh Center for Arts and Media, it's not my department, but I have seen our Artists in Schools and Communities program carry out projects like this in different community centers or schools. And I think especially for youth in an area, it can be really powerful for them to feel like they had a big role in creating something that they get to see every day, and that makes their community more beautiful. But like you said, there's not always going to be that ideal engagement. I do think that when public art is going to go into a community space, it is important for that artist to be willing to meet with community members and get their input about what would be the best fit. I think there is such a balance between, them having creative license, but also understanding that this is a project that's, beyond just them. It's something for everybody. And so it might involve a little bit of coaching, but I think, when reviewing proposals, for me, it would be important to see that an artist is willing to kind of have that sort of engagement with the community instead of just, here's my project, I don't want to make any changes, and I want to do it as is and just, make it happen. I think there are lots of talented artists and the art would look great, but I think there's just so much more power if a community feels like they've had a say and a part in that art that's going to be part of their daily lives.
I agree with community engagement on all levels of a new project. If it's going to involve the community using it, they should have a say in what's going on, and also referring to the design professionals on precedents in other cities and that sort of thing that have been successful in other places. Because not everything has been done in Pittsburgh, so new things are sometimes good to bring into the thick of it. I can't speak informed about working with artists specifically. I don't have experience with working specifically with like public art, but I do believe that art that makes you feel things is important, whether or not it's positive or negative, and I hope that perspective can be respected to a certain level, obviously, for the city. But I do believe that art is subjective, and I think it's important to keep that in mind whenever we are creating new spaces, and having people talk about it is important because that brings people there as well. I think that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I think a little bit to Kendall's point, the civic design side is obviously a little less art focused perhaps than the art side. Thinking of like park projects, they already have such a robust community engagement process that's run by the city throughout the entire project. I'm not sure there'd be much left for us to say at that point. That wouldn't just be meddling in a process that had already been well underway, all sorts of meetings that they have over that for the time. But I think thinking to more of the building side again, let's say that is where we can push public works is other side who isn't necessarily as art focused, you know what I mean? They don't think in that way where, let's say we're doing a fire station in Homewood. We know that there's the Public Safety Training Academy at Westinghouse. Is there some way where those students are involved in how do you design a fire and what do you learn? And, is it something as simple as the handprints and the, you know what I mean? There's all sorts of little things that make communities feel a part of those sorts of projects that I do think we could be helpful in pushing, because I don't think that our guys just often think like that in those ways. And, you know, there's that weird fine line of how do you make like a fire station feel like a welcoming space, you know, but there's all sorts of creative small things I think that we can then push that, again, to my point, like that isn't expensive, that doesn't derail the project. You know, these days they're doing a lot of prefab stuff, so there is only a certain amount of space you can then get into and meddle with and push them on. But I think there are lots of ways we can be more creative and intentional about the building side and civic design, about, because I would wager, I don't know obviously, but I'd wager like those are the meetings that probably no one shows up to, you know, is the Public Works EMS station meeting, unless, you know, it's on a plot of land that somebody's upset about that doesn't have anything to do with the building necessarily. It has to do with the project as a whole, right? So I think we can be more intentional, and I would actually want to think a bit more and see what other cities do about incorporating public art into fire stations and police stations and EMS stations and you know, whatever the next garage looks like. You know, how do we make those things feel a little more welcoming? And often I think that's going to be like pushing them to partner with the art side and with other artists. I'm thinking of like, you know, the sign shop buildings at the Strip, you know, hot area, lots going on, big blank walls and nothing. You know, if we were going to renovate that, that should be a cool area to do something interesting in that incorporates all sorts of community input on top of the existing processes that we have.
Okay, great. I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you so much.
You?
Yep.
Thank you, and thank you for the robust conversation. I look forward to you all serving, and I look forward to how you'll be able to beautify and artify our city, if that's a word. Okay. With that, having exhausted the business of this agenda, we are adjourned.